Hello. Hi, good afternoon, good morning. Ay, sorry. Saglit ha. Dapat pala na kami. Maingay. Ito. Tsaka pala. Okay. Saglit ha. Paano ba? Sige, saglit ha. Hindi ko ma-mute. Saglit. Ngayon, naka-off ba? Hindi. Ay, saglit ha. Ino-off ko yung sa video connect. Parang ayaw mag-off. Oo. Yes. Yung mic mismo. Sa video connect or sa... may speaker and then may mic. Yung mic, kiniklik ko, ayaw mag-off. Ay, speaker, ayaw din. Bali may speaker, mic, camera off, naka-off, and then yung share screen na. Baka sa Windows mismo, no? Subukan pa sa Windows mismo. Sa settings. Saglit lang, ha?
Welcome to today's Friday from January to November 2019 and delivers interactive medical lectures by prominent specialists here and abroad on common medical conditions in the geriatric population. The webinars are free and open to all physicians, healthcare professionals, and medical and allied medical students. CPD units for MDs, nurses, and pharmacists will be provided. Registration is free. If you have pre-registered, you only need to sign in for attendance check. Otherwise, please register on-site. Just click on the links for today's webinar at the bottom of the UPM livestream window or in the description box of FB Live or YouTube Live. This is an important step that you need to do to have your attendance recorded and to receive the link to the evaluation form. Once you sign in for attendance, the post-webinar confirmation email will be sent within 12 to 24 hours and not immediately. To ensure that you receive your certificates in your inbox, please be reminded of the following. Make sure that your details are complete and spelled correctly, especially your names and registered email addresses. Please do not abbreviate. Example, yahoo.com into y.com. Ensure that your email inbox is not full and add these email addresses flashed on your screen to your contacts. Check your spam folder, and if our emails landed there, mark them as not spam. We are now using UP Manila Livestream, FB Live at Aging Webinars, and YouTube Live at Aging Webinars channel. If you are encountering problems in internet connectivity, kindly refresh the page. For UP Manila Livestream, kindly turn up the volume using the audio icon. For other problems, please refer to the downloadable guide at the bottom of the livestream window. The webinar lecture will run for 20 to 30 minutes, followed by a question and answer portion. Ask questions or comment by typing into the UP Manila livestream Q&A box on the right lower corner of your screen, or type into the comments box in FB Live or YouTube Live. A link to an online evaluation form will be sent to your registered email addresses 2 days after the confirmation email is sent after the webinar. Please answer the online evaluation form to receive your certificate in your registered email inbox around 2 to 4 weeks after the webinar, depending on the number of participants and CPD unit approval. The webinar will begin in 10 minutes. Please stand by. Welcome to today's webinar. This is part of a year-long medical webinar series on aging and longevity, an initiative of the Mu Sigma Phi sorority in celebration of its 85th year, in cooperation with the UP College of Medicine, the UP Medical Foundation, and the Mu Sigma Phi Foundation. The beneficiary for this project is the National Institutes of Health Institute on Aging. This webinar series runs every second and last Friday from January to November 2019 and delivers interactive medical lectures by prominent specialists here and abroad on common medical conditions in the geriatric population. The webinars are free and open to all physicians, healthcare professionals, and medical and allied medical students. CPD units for MDs, nurses, and pharmacists will be provided. Registration is free. If you have pre-registered, you only need to sign in for attendance check. Otherwise, please register on-site. Just click on the links for today's webinar at the bottom of the UPM livestream window or in the description box of FB Live or YouTube Live. This is an important step that you need to do to have your attendance recorded and to receive the link to the evaluation form. Once you sign in for attendance, the post-webinar confirmation email will be sent within 12 to 24 hours and not immediately. To ensure that you receive your certificates in your inbox, please be reminded of the following. Make sure that your details are complete and spelled correctly, especially your names and registered email addresses. Please do not abbreviate. Example, yahoo.com into y.com. Ensure that your email inbox is not full and add these email addresses flashed on your screen to your contacts. Check your spam folder, and if our emails landed there, mark them as not spam. We are now using UP Manila Livestream, FB Live at Aging Webinars, and YouTube Live at Aging Webinars channel. If you are encountering problems in internet connectivity, kindly refresh the page. For UP Manila livestream, kindly turn up the volume using the audio icon. For other problems, please refer to the downloadable guide at the bottom of the livestream window. The webinar lecture will run for 20 to 30 minutes, followed by a question and answer portion. Ask questions or comment by typing into the UP Manila livestream Q&A box on the right lower corner of your screen, or type into the comments box in FB Live or YouTube Live. A link to an online evaluation form will be sent to your registered email addresses 2 days after the confirmation email is sent after the webinar. Please answer the online evaluation form to receive your certificate in your registered email inbox around 2 to 4 weeks after the webinar, depending on the number of participants and CPD unit approval. The webinar will begin in 5 minutes. Please stand by. Welcome to today's webinar. This is part of a year-long medical webinar series on aging and longevity, an initiative of the Mu Sigma Phi sorority in celebration of its 85th year, in cooperation with the UP College of Medicine, the UP Medical Foundation, and the Mu Sigma Phi Foundation. The beneficiary for this project is the National Institutes of Health Institute on Aging. This webinar series runs every second and last Friday from January to November 2019 and delivers interactive medical lectures by prominent specialists here and abroad on common medical conditions in the geriatric population. The webinars are free and open to all physicians, healthcare professionals, and medical and allied medical students. CPD units for MDs, nurses, and pharmacists will be provided. Registration is free. If you have pre-registered, you only need to sign in for attendance check. Otherwise, please register on-site. Just click on the links for today's webinar at the bottom of the UPM livestream window or in the description box of FB Live or YouTube Live. This is an important step that you need to do to have your attendance recorded and to receive the link to the evaluation form. Once you sign in for attendance, the post-webinar confirmation email will be sent within 12 to 24 hours and not immediately. To ensure that you receive your certificates in your inbox, please be reminded of the following. Make sure that your details are complete and spelled correctly, especially your names and registered email addresses. Please do not abbreviate. Example, yahoo.com into y.com. Ensure that your email inbox is not full and add these email addresses flashed on your screen to your contacts. Check your spam folder, and if our emails landed there, mark them as not spam. We are now using UP Manila Livestream, FB Live at Aging Webinars, and YouTube Live at Aging Webinars channel. If you are encountering problems in internet connectivity, kindly refresh the page. For UP Manila Livestream, kindly turn up the volume using the audio icon. For other problems, please refer to the downloadable guide at the bottom of the livestream window. The webinar lecture will run for 20 to 30 minutes, followed by a question and answer portion. Ask questions or comment by typing into the UP Manila Livestream Q&A box on the right lower corner of your screen, or type into the comments box in FB Live or YouTube Live. A link to an online evaluation form will be sent to your registered email addresses 2 days after the confirmation email is sent after the webinar.
Good morning, everyone. I am Christine Urquiza, Mu Sigma Phi Sorority, Batch 1999, speaking in behalf of the Aging and Longevity webinars, team of the Mu Sigma Phi Sorority. We are streaming our final webinar for this year, live from the video conference room of the UP Manila Information Management Service. Our time in Manila is now exactly 12 noon. For today's webinar, we are privileged to have a priest of the Archdiocese of Manila and the current rector of the Pontificio Colegio Filipino in Rome. He finished bachelor's in philosophy and bachelor's in theology in the University of Navarre in Spain from 1988 to 1993. He was ordained by Saint John Paul II in Seville, Spain on June 12, 1993. He took his licentiate and doctorate in sacred theology at the Angelicum in Rome from 1993 to 1997. He further pursued a postdoctoral fellowship program in bioethics at the National Catholic Bioethics Center in Boston in 1997. His previous positions include the following: official of the Pontifical Council for the Family in the Vatican, Dean of San Carlos Seminary Graduate School of Theology in Makati, and chairman of the Bioethics Committee of Cardinal Santos Medical Center in San Juan, Metro Manila. He was awarded the Distinguished Alumni for Leadership and Service by the UP Alumni Association in America. He is also the Vatican spokesperson for Radio Veritas. Ladies and gentlemen, streaming from Rome, we are honored to welcome Father Gregory Ramon D. Gaston.
Hello, everyone from Rome. I am Father Greg, and thank you for joining us in this webinar. I hope our audio is okay and our video. We have this topic: spirituality in aging and spirituality. So we try to combine these two concepts. We have the following learning objectives. The first is to discern changes in spirituality as one ages. Number two, to find the connection between spirituality and healthcare outcomes. And thirdly, to discuss ways to integrate the spiritual practice of the healthcare profession and the patient into healthcare delivery. So we see that we will go around these same topics, spirituality, aging, but we will look at this from the different perspectives. First, objective to discern changes in spirituality as one ages. Practically all cultures all over the world throughout history has have spiritual practices. Each culture has a spiritual practice. So we look at our history in Asia, even before the coming of the Spaniards, even before the coming of the Muslims in Mindanao, we already had our own spirituality. And we go to Africa, we go to other places in Asia, in America, in Europe, we would always see that all cultures would have this spiritual aspect. How come? We might wonder how come spirituality is always within this human existence. Maybe because it is normal for us to see phenomena, to observe things that we cannot easily explain. And therefore, we try to discover how come these are happening. Even simple things, no? Like the sun rising each day and setting each day. Or maybe typhoons there in the Philippines or here in Rome. No? Today, there's an advisory from the government that there will be strong winds and there will be a difficult situation for traffic and for that's why they are closing the schools, they are closing the cemeteries, they are closing the parks today here in Rome. So phenomena that have been observed ever since, and we continue to observe, but which we could not really explain. This would open to us that thought, at least, not that possibility of something that is beyond what is material, something that is spiritual, something that we cannot easily even capture, we can easily touch, no, we cannot easily explain. Also, the experience of human weakness. This is an everyday experience here in the healthcare setting. We see every day our own human weakness and the human weakness of other people. So we are weak, and this makes us think that maybe there is something or someone stronger than us, something or someone greater than us. And so, again, this is why spirituality is a universal experience. And of course, the reality of death. We are so used to activity, we are so used to waking up every morning, sleeping at night, hoping to wake up again the next morning. But also, we see death take place, and we find it difficult to explain death, and we begin to wonder what might happen after death, what might be happening to other people who have died, and what will happen to me when I die. Okay, so all this would make us at least open to the question of spirituality. And maybe this is why spirituality is a universal experience throughout the world. Aging, so we now go to aging, spirituality and aging. This is our theme. Aging may weaken or strengthen spiritual life. Each one of us has a personal experience with spirituality. Maybe when we were young, our parents, our brothers and sisters introduced us to spirituality. In school, in the church, of course, no, we were exposed to these ideas, these experiences of spirituality. And then maybe studying a little or maybe just reflecting a little, no, we see our faith and we compare this with science. Faith and science, sometimes we find that they conflict. Sometimes we cannot explain something and we try to go to faith. And sometimes we cannot explain our faith. We try to check it out with science. But we could also think that faith and science have the same goal. What is the goal of faith? To seek the truth. And what is the goal of science? Exactly the same, also to seek the truth. And we could say that truth, the source of truth of faith and the source of truth of science are the same. God as the source of truth. And that is why, come to think of it, because the same objective, there is the same objective, truth, and the source of truth is the same, God, then the conclusion is faith and science should not be contradicting. Faith should not contradict science, and science should not contradict faith. But if, well, that is from the theoretical level. At the practical level, sometimes we find them conflicting, or some items might be conflicting between faith and science. Well, I think the conclusion that we have to reach would be that we still have to study more. If ever there is a seeming conflict between faith and science, then we still have to study a little more, both our faith and our knowledge, our scientific knowledge. We have to study both a little more because the truth is always the same and the same. We have the same source of truth. Of course, the same truth, but different from different perspectives, perhaps. And we try to look at them so that we could come up with a unified knowledge, with a unified concept, a unified reality. And then, anyway, speaking of faith and science, historically, many great names in the sciences were also clergymen, meaning people who have really tried to study their faith, to live their faith, but at the same time see and so many discoveries, see so many facts in science that they are able to combine with faith. And just think of Medel, the monk, Augustinian monk, if I'm not mistaken, who started the theory, all these theories in genetics, and also I think Copernicus. Sorry, I made a mistake. The guy placed Galileo. I think it was Copernicus who was also a clergyman, and then Golgi, who studied medicine as well. So our aging, some people say that as we grow older, we would become more religious. But some people would also say, well, maybe some would grow a little less religious. And throughout the stages, different stages of one's life, as a child, maybe as an adolescent, later on, a young adult, and an elderly adult, I think it's really a case to case basis. No? Some would grow stronger and maybe some would weaken a little in their faith at some point in time and then change and then come back or leave, the different scenarios. But we try to see how we could take advantage of whatever our spirituality, our faith could offer to us. Becoming closer to God and with each other. Spirituality at first is very personal. Me and my God, I have to enter into a relationship with my God. But at the same time, spirituality is very communitarian, meaning we are with others. It is not simply my relationship with God, but also my relationship with others. But from the spiritual perspective, my relationship with others would also pass through my relationship with God. Meaning, if I am close to God, you are close to God, she is close to God, he is close to God, other people are close to God, we are all close to God. That should also bring us closer to each other. So it's not simply each person becoming closer to God, no, and that's it. No, rather, as we all go closer to God, then we also go also closer towards each other. That is why I think it's also an observation that persons intensely practicing the same faith get along well with each other. St. Paul, in his letter to the Corinthians, says, for just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. So we are one body from the Christian perspective. We are one body with Christ. And so we are members of the same body. So if we continue reading this passage from St. Paul, he would say that if the hand or the foot has a little problem, then it is a problem not only of that hand or that foot, it is the problem of the whole body. It is the problem of the whole body because who is sick? It's not simply the hand that is sick or the foot that is sick. It is the whole person. So it's not even only the body that is sick. It is not simply the person's body that is sick. Rather, it is the whole person with his body and his spirit that is sick. And so St. Paul encourages us to be very united with each other. And I would extend this even united not only among Catholics, not only among Christians, but among all people, because if we extend this idea of St. Paul, we form one body with each other. And now maybe from a little more practical side, no, since our topic is spirituality, and we have covered that a little bit. Now we'll cover aging, spirituality and aging. This is Filipinos are deeply spiritual. And this comment I always hear whenever I am with non-Filipinos, for example, priests or bishops or even cardinals, no, they would always comment to me that Filipinos are very spiritual. Yes, that is true. And I tell them whenever a Filipino leaves home, what the Filipino would always do is to look for two things. And what are these two things? First, he or she would look for other Filipinos, number one. And number two, he or she would look for a church. And that is a very natural tendency for us Filipinos. Yes, Filipinos are deeply spiritual. I would add that Filipinos are aging. Filipinos are aging. So connecting our two topics, spirituality and aging. And why? There is a rapidly declining fertility rate. Fertility as the number of children per woman. So it's not even number of children per family, but number of children per woman. In the 1970s, there was an average of 6 children per woman. Today, the average Filipina would have 2.7 children, meaning less than half compared with the 1970s. And this we can easily observe. Our parents, our grandparents, how many brothers and sisters were they? Maybe easily seven, eight, nine, 10, or even 12. I remember Cardinal Sin of Manila. They were 16 siblings. 16 siblings, and he was the last. And he was always joking that had my parents not born 16 children, I wouldn't have existed. That's so Cardinal Sin. And then our own parents, maybe our own brothers and sisters. But today, how many children do our family members, our relatives, our friends, how many children do they have? I think now four is already a big family. Six would be a big family. Today, even the average Filipino could have few, and maybe two or three children. So statistics would tell us that each Filipina would have 2.7 children nowadays. So what is happening with our population? Our population pyramid. Before there were 6 children per woman, and now only 2.7 children per woman. But let us look before entering into the Philippine situation. This also happened. Let us look at other countries, especially the more developed countries in America and here in Europe, and other places there in Japan, Korea, and so on. What happened since the 1970s also? Their number of children was low. Our situation now is similar to their situation in the 1970s. They went below the total fertility rate replacement level. Here in my next slide. And in their the replacement level is 2.1 children per woman, meaning with 2.1 children, the population would be stable, would be replaced. So what will happen with 2 children per woman? When the father dies and the mother dies, two people die, and then given that other many people do not have children because of infertility, because of decision, no, not marrying, and so on. So you need 2.1 to replace the two people who die. But experience in other countries going below the three, the TFR, total fertility rate level, would mean that the country would continue to go down. The 3, 2.1, and even below 2.1, as is the case in other countries now. So in the Philippines, going back to the Philippines, studies would show, I think I read an article in 2008 or 2009 from the UP Population Institute saying that the largest growing sector in Philippine population is not the children, but the elderly. Not the children, but the elderly are growing at a fast rate. Okay, what does this mean? Here, I'll show you some population pyramids. 1970, 2002, and 2050. So 1970, here you see the number of males to the left and the number of females to the right of this population pyramid. So in the 70s, we see about 7.5% of the population were young males, 0 to 4 years old, and then another 7.5%, a little more, were the females. But in 2020, practically today, the population pyramid, we would see that the base is shrinking, meaning the number of children is shrinking. And then if we go to 2050, only about 4% of the population would be 0 to 4 years old females, and then about 4% or even less, 3% would be the males. So what is happening? Our population is shrinking at the base. Meanwhile, at the top, all the way up to 98 plus years old in our graph, but here I place the number 60, and it is at this level, more or less, that the 60 years old are found. So we look at this level of the 60. In 1970, this is a little narrow. The number of people 60 and above was small, the proportion, and then 2020, and then we go to 2050, and there is a large number of elderly. So our Philippine population is growing today, is still growing today. Not so much because of a growing number of children, not so much because of childbirth, but rather our Philippine population is still growing because of a larger number of elderly. Okay, so this is the point here. Our topic is spirituality and aging. If we look at aging, the Filipino population is really aging. We are having a lot more elderly. Well, thanks be to God because of better healthcare, and better services and so on. But economically speaking, it is we have to support the elderly with all our love and all our care. But at the same time, the number of children is getting smaller. So the population, the Philippine society needs to take care of less children, but it has to take care of more elderly. And so we try to reflect on this fact also, this challenge that we are all called to, that we have to take care of a large number of elderly. And this is why our topic today, spirituality and aging, is also very, we could say, apt, very much called for in present day Philippine society. So that is our first topic, spirituality and aging. Our second objective, to find the connection between spirituality and healthcare outcomes. Spirituality and healthcare outcomes, especially, again, connecting this with aging. There has been an increasing interest in academic research regarding this topic, spirituality and healthcare outcomes. Someone sent me an article by Lavretsky Helen on spirituality and aging. Spirituality and aging. This was published in 2010 in a journal, Aging Health. This article has a bibliography of 227 books and journals, scientific books and journals regarding the topic, just to show us how interested people are in this topic of spirituality and aging. Some examples I placed here: Handbook of Religion and Health, and then an article, Is there a process of spiritual change or development associated with aging? A critical review of research, meaning this article is studying so many other researches. Another publication, Research on Religion and Aging. an annotated bibliography, again, a publication on so many other publications on this topic of religion, spirituality, and aging. Religion, spirituality, and healthcare, colon, social, ethical, and practical considerations. American Journal of Medicine. Another topic, another title, spiritual issues in psychiatric care. Okay. Beliefs and attitudes of hospital inpatients about faith, healing, and prayer. Patient attitudes regarding physician inquiry into spiritual and religious issues. Okay, so even this idea of the physician asking about spiritual topic, as about the spiritual views of the patient. All this is being studied by in scientific journals. So again, going back to a previous idea that I presented, this religion and science, faith and science, I think they really have to go hand in hand. I think there's really no conflict between faith and science. And I could say this personally when I did my pre-med in UP Los Baños around the years early 1980s. Around those years, in the decades of 1980, maybe a little before 1979 until 19, maybe 91, 92, about 20 of us became priests from UP Los Baños. So I think this would always be curious or sometimes funny, in a nice way, because imagine a state university without religion, without faith, technically speaking, maybe, or officially speaking, no, but 20 of us became priests, and then so many became sisters as well, religious sisters. And I think this is because of an honest scientific inquiry would actually lead us to an experience of human limitation, of questioning. There might be something way beyond our human capacities, our human limitations, and the fact that we discover things simply show us that we are limited, and there might be something or someone greater than us who is not limited in the same way that we are limited. Anyway, going back to our topic, researchers find mixed connections between spirituality and improved healthcare. Some give a very positive, strong correlation between spirituality and improved healthcare and healing, getting better. Others attribute improved healthcare perhaps to other factors. But my point here is that there is an increased interest in this topic, connecting spirituality and health care. And the same article of Lavretsky tells us, this author tells us that interest in spirituality and aging has increased recently owing to overwhelming evidence of positive health outcomes linked to spirituality and religious participation. So there are so many indications of linking spirituality and improve health care outcomes. And our interest is not only in the scientific level, in the theoretical level, as what maybe many of these articles and books would point out. We are also interested at the practical level. Why? Because we are often faced with a question whether to enter or not to enter into spiritual topics in health care. Should the doctor, should the nurse, should the other healthcare professionals also enter into spiritual topics, or should they only be limited to bodily health care? Lavretsky tells us that improved understanding and respect for an individual's spiritual practice can help shape personalized medical care for older adults and improve health outcomes. Improve health outcomes. So maybe even just from a rather, even we could say, simplistic way, thinking about it, there is, yes, a possibility. And since there is a possibility, we could also try that possibility. And then if we see a patient who is interested, clearly interested in health, in spiritual topics, then I think the doctor or the nurse or other medical professionals could also take advantage of this fact that the patient is interested in spiritual topics, and the patient is interested not only in the bodily health, but also in spiritual health as it relates to bodily health. In practice, this does not mean always to immediately discuss spiritual life. So it's not that the doctor sees the patient and immediately talks about spiritual life, but rather maybe sometimes just to start. Let's start by knowing the patient's spiritual preferences. So uh, this is not disturbing the patient or putting the patient at a difficult situation, but rather simply to see in a very natural way whether the patient is interested in spiritual topics or not. If not, then okay, no problem. But if the patient is interested, as healthcare professionals, maybe we could also think that if this could help in the patient's bodily care, then there's no difficulty at all, there's no problem at all to enter also into the spiritual topics. At least in the Philippines and in so many other places abroad, even in government hospitals, we usually have a chaplaincy, a Catholic chaplaincy open to all religions. And this is part of the service of the diocese or the parish, part of the service of the church, to take care of the spiritual needs of the patients. And of course, it is not very easy all the time. We have to be realistic and we see that there are difficulties, and also we try to overcome them when integrating spirituality into healthcare. First of all, the doctor might be feeling uneasy to enter into spiritual topics. But it would help if the doctor could remember that spirituality could help patients. That spirituality could help improve healthcare. Spirituality could be advantageous to the patient. So the doctor might feel uneasy, or there might be a lack of time because the doctor has to see so many other patients. But maybe we could also remember that it is an investment in time that will help patients. So eventually, if there is a positive outcome because of that little spiritual intervention, then maybe it would really be worth the effort, it would be worth the time. And of course, healthcare professionals might also feel that they don't have an adequate training regarding spiritual topics. Well, just like any other skill, any other field, uh, things would come with practice. One would learn with experience. So, this is our second topic, linking spirituality with healthcare. And now, the third objective to discuss ways to integrate the spiritual practice of the healthcare professional and the patient into healthcare delivery. Okay, so now we go to the actual practice, to the actual integration of spiritual topics into healthcare delivery. As we mentioned earlier, it is not a matter of directly diving into spiritual topics. Rather, little by little, as part of an integrated healthcare, aside from the medical, aside from the psychological, emotional, and so on, we also enter into the spiritual. And there could be some lead questions that we could use to start with, and these questions would not harm the patient or not would not make the patient uneasy. And there is no harm at all in asking the spiritual preferences of the patient. Sample lead questions would be: would you like to talk with someone regarding spiritual matters? So if simply asking yes or no, and if the patient says no, okay, we respect the patient and we don't enter into spiritual matters. But if the patient says yes, then that is already a lead for us, to try to see the patient's situation, the patient's preferences, and eventually maybe enter deeper, or maybe asking some other people, the chaplaincy or some other healthcare professional, to deal with the spiritual topics. Another question would be: would you also like others to pray for you? Especially if we see that the patient is prayerful, then we could ask if the patient would like others to pray for him or her as well. Another question would be: would you like the chaplain to visit you? Simply to pay the patient a visit. No, there's just to say hello without having to enter directly or immediately, unless the patient wants to, no, into the spiritual, the sacraments, for example, no, or maybe some other form of spiritual care. So again, our idea is simply to ask the patient what the patient's preferences are. If there's no preference, if the patient says no, okay, we respect that decision. But if the patient says yes, then we take advantage of that spiritual preference so that we could take care of the patient in a very holistic way. If prayer might help in medical care, so we ask, at least try. At least try. If prayer might help, then take advantage of that possibility. It is a case to case approach always. We have to enter into dialogue. If the patient and the medical and the healthcare professional belong to different faiths, different religions, there's always a possibility of dialogue. Now, what if they belong to the same faith? They have the same religion, then they could share more freely, more openly, these spiritual topics. And in a very practical way, if the doctor says that the patient sees that the patient has a prayer card, or a crucifix or some other item of devotion, then we are sure that the patient most probably, most likely, would like to integrate spiritual care into the medical attention given to the patient. Among the Filipinos, elderly Filipinos are usually religious. Elderly Filipinos are usually religious. I don't know of actual studies done on this, no? But at least in my observations, elderly Filipinos are deeply religious. They pray, they have a life of piety. And so the elderly patient, Filipino patient, would most probably be interested in spiritual matters. So that could be even our default mode of thinking, that when we see an elderly patient, then probably that patient is religious. Of course, we cannot be always sure, so that is why we have to ask. Filipino patients are open to what doctors say, and this includes spiritual matters. So if the patient sees a doctor examining him or her, then I think the patient would also would not find it awkward. The patient would find it natural if the doctor also asks about spiritual matters. Along this line, most elderly patients would greatly appreciate prayers. And so, in a special way, we also have the task of helping the elderly cope with aging and even accept the reality of death. The reality of death, and this is, I think, the elderly or even any one of us, we have to keep this present always in our minds, that death could come anytime. And finally, we're now going towards the end of my little presentation. Finally, integrating spirituality in the medical curriculum. Since we are talking about healthcare, medical care, seeing patients, and integrating the spiritual component, I think this also could begin not only when the doctor is already there, as a medical practitioner, having passed the board exams, or the nurses or the other medical professionals. Rather, this could be started early, even in medical studies, in the curriculum, integrating spiritual topics in general, including, of course, the scientific literature, allowing students to live their spirituality, perhaps outside classes, through organizations. Medical practitioners are trained to save lives, so they could also be trained to help patients and families accept the end of life, accept the disease, and then eventually also death and dying. And finally, taking into account the patient's spiritual preferences and assessing and integrating spirituality should be considered an SOP in healthcare. So this could already be imbibed during medical training, medical studies, and that if they see the doctors also integrating spiritual topics into healthcare, then when they themselves become uh, doctors, when they graduate, then they could also do the same. So thank you so much for your attention in this presentation.
Thank you very much, Father Gaston, for that enlightening talk. To give us the reactions, we have a doctor couple who are both graduates of UP College of Medicine, class 1991. Our first reactor took her residency in dermatology in the UP Philippine General Hospital, while our second reactor took his residency in pediatrics and fellowship in pediatric pulmonology in the same institution. They are both consultants in Asian Hospital and Medical Center and youth apostolate parent advisors in St. James Renewal Movement in Ayala, Alabang. Please welcome Dr. Ana Gracia A. Garcia, Mu Sigma Phi Sorority Batch 1991, and Dr. Divino R. Garcia.
Thank you. Thank you, Father, for that talk. It's very fit that the last webinar for this season also reminds us doctors and other healthcare givers that we need to think about the patient not only in terms of their uh, physical needs but also with their spiritual needs, no? And doctors really and healthcare givers need to remember that invoking the spiritual component in patients is very beneficial. No, it's not something that's extra, but it is part of healthcare, right? And in some healthcare studies, they say that 75% of patients actually wish that their doctors would talk to them about their spiritual issues, and that uh, patients who engage in religious and spiritual activities actually live 7 years longer than those who do not. No, so we shouldn't, as doctors, not be uncomfortable pala about including spiritual issues in giving healthcare, because it will benefit the patient. It will help them cope with, particularly with chronic diseases. No, in fact, the studies, as we've seen Father tackle that with regards to the interest in the studies, diba? And that the reason for that is because the preliminary studies for spiritual participation with regards to healthcare shows na uh, those who have spirituality and religious care, they improve, no, significantly And the intervention is similar to dietary intervention, exercise, mental stimulation, social connectedness. That's how beautiful it is to be able to successfully guide patients, sick patients, into an engagement of the spiritual issues. Uh, I agree with Father. I mean, Filipino patients are deeply spiritual. And if in other cultures there's some hesitation about engaging them into this type of topics, I find that in my elderly patients, that's not a problem. No? Particularly in patients with long-standing illnesses that have no permanent cure. Like in my field in dermatology, psoriasis, immunologic diseases, bullous diseases, or in cases where we're called in to look at chronically and very sick patients, no? And in the outpatient department where dermatology is found more, no? I find myself invoking the spiritual issues when maximal treatment for inflammatory conditions are already being instituted and are failing, no? So the thing that opened my eyes about Father's talk is that I shouldn't uh, be afraid to label it as spirituality, because usually I label that under, I will say, oh, we already have maximal treatment. What can we do for you pa? I guess you have to look into your anti-inflammatory lifestyle changes already. Diet, exercise, sleeping right, 10 p.m. to 3 a.m., and then things that decrease your stress. And I will always say, you should find time to engage in activities that calm you down, because stress is inflammatory. And that's where I usually put spirituality, right? So I will always say, for me, it's prayer. That's the one that calms me down and decreases my inflammatory markers. I don't know what it's going to be for you. Is it yoga? Is it meditation? Maybe we should, as doctors, really delve into, maybe you need to pray more, maybe you need to find God, which is very easy to do with Filipino patients, particularly those who are already in the elderly age group, because they are spiritual, as Father says. No? And I find also that if we engage our patients this way, that they find relief, that their doctor understands that faith is important to them, that sometimes, for example, in my chronic pain patients or those who are experiencing pain from herpes zoster, I find them sometimes refusing pain treatment because they want to offer it to God. And in my previous life, I would say, "What? Don't offer it to God. Just take tramadol." So sometimes I go there, but now I find myself acknowledging their need for that aspect of their faith, right? And just say, well, if that can manage your pain, it's fine. Uh, my eyes have been opened to the newer studies that pain can be managed indeed by engaging in the faith, right? And it's as good as a pill. It's as good as NSAIDs or tramadol or opioids, no? So that can happen too. I find as I'm more brave to go into that kind of treatment, that it is a joy for patients to be prayed over if they are spiritual. And the studies bear this out. There's a study that in patients with congestive heart failure, with pneumonia, those who are intubated, when they are prayed over, their outcomes are more successful. And that's wonderful for doctors to know. So for me, I guess the takeaway is that a patient is not just a patient with physical needs. A patient is both physical, spiritual, emotional. And for us to concentrate only on the physical, we're missing out on treating the patient as a whole. If we acknowledge their spiritual needs, it is easier for them to follow us, because after all, doctoring is a profession of trust. And when we go and acknowledge their spiritual needs, then it is easier for them to trust us. It is easier for them to trust their bodies, which are precious to them, to us, to strangers. And that's what I found in my patients. They're very loyal to me. If there's that issue and I acknowledge it, they're very loyal to me. Of course, for doctors, the hard part about that is the time element, because if you only have a 2 hour consulting period and you have like 18 patients, taking that extra time really will take away from your clinic hours, and that is a bit of a challenge. I know that that is more of a challenge to my husband here, who is weird because he's here in an aging seminar, but he's a pediatrician by profession. But I'm guessing that he deals more with the elderly than I do. No, and he will explain that to you.
Good afternoon. First, thank you for including me here. Actually, it's an eye opener to be taught about something spiritual, something we don't measure, something we don't see or hear or feel or taste, into scientific investigation. We're all trained as doctors to go for things that you can measure, you can see, you can hear. All of a sudden, we're saying that spiritual things are working and it can be subjected to scientific investigation. I deal more with children, but I also deal with the adults, the grandparents. In our present situation, there are a lot of overseas Filipino workers who leave their kids to the care of their parents, the grandparents of the kids, or the other caregivers. And I'm usually left to deal with them. The challenge is not talking about spirituality with the kids. It's more of talking about spirituality with the lolo or the lola. Much worse if we're talking about spirituality to an adult who is accompanying the lolo or the lola. Father Greg said a while ago that spirituality is personal. And like most things, if it's personal, we usually hesitate in discussing these things. While Father Greg was talking and my wife was speaking, I was listening to them, I felt I was one of the majority of doctors they're alluding to who are hesitant in including spirituality in their medical treatment. And the challenges I face are the following. Well, first, it's hard to gauge whether a person is spiritual or not. Although most Filipinos are spiritual by nature and prayerful, in the first visit, although you already know that there is a spiritual aspect to this, it's hard to ask them if they're spiritual. And if you so sense that they are not, or they're curious about spirituality, the next thing you ask is, am I trained enough? Am I equipped to talk to them about spirituality? And the more practical, on the practical level, the question is, would I have the time to talk to them about spirituality in so short a time? It was refreshing to hear Father Greg say that the initial consult doesn't have to be a total in-depth discussion of spirituality. It can be a simple knowing of the level or the status of the spirituality of the caregiver. Are they open to talking about spiritual things? If they're not, and then you move on and go on into medical modalities. We see our patients coming to us from a position of weakness. And I guess it's easy for adults bringing in their kids who are sick because it's the child who is seemingly vulnerable and sick. But for us to tell them or insinuate that there might be some spiritual breakdown in the adult who's taking care of the child, some adults would not admit that easily. So the winning the trust of the caregiver might take some time. And I like the way Father Greg said it. It doesn't have to be a one-shot thing. You may talk about spirituality over a series of consultations and see how the caregiver responds to it. And it's true. It's an investment of time that helps not only the patient, but also helps the doctor.
Yeah.
Because once you've spent quite a bit of time in your consultation, the subsequent consultations would be a lot shorter and easier. Compliance also increases once you establish a trust with your patient's caregiver. So the benefit is not only for the patient, but also for the doctor. But then again, the initial question is, would I be willing to spend this much time to gain the trust? The other question that bugs your mind is, if I do this on the initial consult and the caregiver likes it, more often than not, in the subsequent consult, they would expect me to spend as much time talking to them as I did in the first consult. Yes, that's it.
Thank you, Dr. Grace and Dr. Divino Garcia, for that inspiring reactions. And you did a little bit of my job already by putting the highlights of Father's talk. Okay. We now have 17 people viewing through UP Manila live stream, 46 through YouTube Live, and 606 through Facebook Live. And there are also small groups viewing from all over the Philippines. The floor is now open for questions from the audience. Just type in your questions at the Q&A chat box in the right lower corner of the live stream window, or type in comments in YouTube Live or FB at Aging Webinars for Facebook Live viewers. So our first question is for Father, or well, most of them will be for Father. Father, what does the church think about euthanasia, especially in our for our topic, especially when the elderly is already suffering so much?
Okay, yes. First of all, we have to distinguish between euthanasia and I'll explain later, and allowing the dying patient to actually die. A little complicated, no? Distinguish between euthanasia, killing the patient, and on the other hand, allowing the dying patient to actually die. As I mentioned earlier, doctors are trained to save lives. And sometimes doctors would tend to insert, when the doctor sees the patient is dying and sees a vein available for inserting another needle, then the doctor would insert another needle, try another procedure, and so on, when in fact the patient is actually already dying, reaching the end of his or her life. This is because death is an event, but dying is a process. So dying is a process, no? It's an ongoing process. So little by little, the patient is dying. So and there's also a saying, no, that I think pneumonia is the how is it, the dying person's friend. The dying person's friend. So the patient could have so many different conditions, but pneumonia could set in and it's difficult to treat. Then the patient would eventually die. But my point is, in some cases, the patient is already dying. So pulling the plug, in quotation marks, meaning stopping certain procedures, certain medications that do not really offer hope. Certain procedures, medications that do not really extend the patient's life, but simply extends the dying process. And especially if these procedures, medications are too burdensome for the patient, involving a lot of pain, involving a lot of discomfort, or overly burdensome for the family or for society. In some places, when we talk about allocation of resources and all this, instead of giving resources to a patient who has no hope for recovery, those limited resources could instead be allocated to patients who could still survive after that. Then this is always a question, allocation of resources. But we could think that these procedures that are overly aggressive may already be stopped. And we are not, from a moral perspective, we are not required to apply procedures and medications that do not really give hope to the patient. And this also means that we are accepting the reality of death. We are accepting the reality of death. A very elderly patient, we do not, in some cases or many cases, we do not have to to subject that patient to an overly aggressive surgery, for example, that might even cause harm to the patient in the long run. So let us just be assured that as long as we take care of the normal needs of the patient, then we are within this normal healthcare for the patient. In some cases, we go to the extraordinary, but if our resources are limited, capacities are limited, then we are simply allowing the dying patient to actually die. And we are not killing the patient. This is not killing the patient. This is not euthanasia. So my answer would be euthanasia is never acceptable. And euthanasia, killing the patient is never acceptable. But withholding or even withdrawing, once initiated, this time withdrawing certain medical procedures, certain medications that do not really offer any more hope to the patient, this is not euthanasia, and therefore this is acceptable. Okay.
Thank you, Father. The next question can be answered by the three of you also, because Ma'am discussed pain earlier. So, can spirituality be utilized as an antidepressant in depressed elderly? So, Father first.
I think the medical doctors would be more capable of yes.
Can spirituality?
Yes.
Yes,
Can-
it can.
Mm.
Yeah, there are studies to show that it can decrease pain. There's a study on breast cancer patients that show that their pain is alleviated when they pray,
Mm.
and or they when they go into consultation with a spiritual group, and that's really important. Religious attendance, even there are studies on that. So yes, there are, but there are also cases where medication is also important and goes hand in hand. Yeah, together.
I've just had a patient recently, a patient who's sick with cerebral palsy, and the, the treatment that we were giving were not working. And the elderly, the tita, was about in her 70s, was so frustrated and asking, is there anything else you can do? But the situation of the child prevents, the delicate condition of the child prevents further examinations to be done. The situation of the mother, who is also a cancer survivor, makes it difficult for them to regularly go on visits to the different subspecialties. So the elderly aunt is driven into frustration and helplessness to the point of being depressed. Being at the end of the ropes and at the end of their wits, uh, the only thing I could offer them was for them to pray and pray that with all our efforts being the best that we can do given the situation, things would turn out for the best. And somehow that brought a smile and a tear to the eye of the tita. But they went home feeling better than their usual disposition, and they left home feeling so helpless. So it can help.
So, in short, it is not meant. Spirituality is not meant to replace antidepressant medication or pain medication, but it will surely help. And I think it does it in two ways. One is when you're praying or you're praying for your family, there's that peace and comfort which comes from talking with your Father, and also there is also that miraculous supernatural healing which comes from having answered prayers.
Tsaka there are neurological studies on that, that when you pray, the parasympathetic system is activated, which is the more relaxed state, and the sympathetic activation is decreased. So it really does have a physical, even spiritual matters
Physiological.
really has physical and physiological basis also.
Okay, thank you. I would like to ask, we have someone who would like to ask Father, and the two of you as healthcare providers, how do we deal with elderly patients who are not Christian or Catholic, say those who are atheists or of other faiths, without being imposing? Father already gave us some clues about it, but maybe you can discuss a little bit more, because this one in particular is about not Christian or Catholic or other faiths.
Yeah, yes. Oftentimes, listening, simply by listening, would do a lot of help, especially if the doctors would listen, would ask, but listen mostly. So we are not there. Even I myself, if I am a chaplain in a hospital, I would never impose my faith on the persons, not even on Catholics. I would not impose my beliefs on that person, but simply maybe ask, maybe clarify. And above all, I would say listen to that patient. And that is how we would know how to deal with spiritual matters with that patient.
Uh, Personally, if a person is neither religious nor spiritual, I agree with Father. I do not impose my own beliefs. but I continue to be spiritual and religious. And I think the only thing I could do is to pray for that person. If I'm not able to change the views of that person, the way I regard that person because I have prayed improves. Therefore, the way I treat that person improves. So indirectly, that person will be better because I'm treating her better just because I prayed.
That would be our last question because of time constraints. Thank you for all the questions. And once again, thank you, Father Gaston, for
Thank you
enlightening
so
us with your presence and answers today. Okay. So, in summary, we learned from the webinar today that aging may weaken or strengthen spiritual life. Number one. Two, there is overwhelming evidence of positive health outcomes which are linked to spirituality and religious participation. Number three, it is a good idea to integrate spirituality in medical care and start in the medical curriculum. Start when the future doctors are still students, so that we are able to uh, we are used to or become expert or experienced in integrating spirituality in medical care. So especially for the elderly, this includes coping with aging issues and the acceptance of the reality of death. So with that, we would like to thank Father Gaston, Doctors Divino and Grace Garcia for taking time out of their busy schedules to share their insights with us today. Thank you. Okay. Watch out for the release of our Aging and Longevity Webinars ebook this March 2020. It will contain 24 chapters on the topics discussed in our webinars. Please watch the UP Med. Okay. As this is our last Aging and Longevity Medical. Sorry. Please watch. Okay. As this is our last Aging and Longevity Medical webinar, we would like to acknowledge all who have worked hard to make this endeavor a success. Congratulations to the heads of this project for the excellent direction and a successful run. Thank you to the undergraduate CISES of the Mu Sigma Phi sorority for their efforts and dedication. The success of our webinars would not have been possible if not for IMS. Thank you very much, IMS team. We would also like to thank all who have helped the webinar team in every way possible. In behalf of the whole Mu Sigma Phi sorority webinar team, we would like to thank all of you for your undying support. Before we end, may we ask Father Gaston to give us his blessing?
Thank you so much once again to all. Thank you to all our listeners. And I ask you for your prayers for us here in Rome and for everyone. Pray especially for Cardinal Tagle of the Archdiocese of Manila. As you might know, he is being assigned here at the Vatican. So it is a loss for Manila, but it is a gain for the whole church. So now I would like to bless all of you through the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary. May the Lord bless each one of us and our families in this Advent season as we await the coming of Jesus. We also ask the help of our brothers and sisters all over the world as we pray together. And we ask the Lord to strengthen all of us in this coming Christmas season. All this we ask through Christ our Lord. Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Father Gaston. With that, this is Dr. Urquiza. In behalf of the rest of the Aging and Longevity Webinars team of the Mu Sigma Phi Medical Sorority of the UP College of Medicine, signing off for 2019. Stay tuned for some reminders.
The Aging and Longevity Medical Webinars team of the Mu Sigma Phi sorority would like to thank our partners, the UP College of Medicine, UP Medical Foundation, and the Mu Sigma Phi Foundation. We are also grateful to support from the Postgraduate Institute of Medicine, UP Manila Information Management Service, and DOST ASTI, and the PRC Board of Nursing. Most of all, we thank you, our participants, for spending your lunch hour with us. To receive your certificates of attendance, kindly answer the evaluation through the link that will be sent to your email addresses after you sign the attendance sheet for today's webinar. The certificates will then be emailed to your registered email addresses within 2 to 4 weeks. Here is a quick view of the schedule of our upcoming webinars. For more details and updates, please check our Facebook page at facebook.com/agingwebinars and our Twitter timeline at twitter.com/agingwebinars. Today's webinar recording and all webinar recordings may be viewed at YouTube at Aging Webinars channel.